The Hindu Kush Mountains stood silent in the early morning light, their snow-capped peaks piercing the Afghan sky like ancient sentinels. Navy Corpsman Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead, adjusting the heavy medical pack on her shoulders as she moved with the Marine Rifle Platoon through the narrow valley. At 28 years old, she'd been deployed to Afghanistan's Kunar province for 7 months, embedded with Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The local villagers called this area the Valley of Death. Sarah understood why. "Angel 6, you good back there?" Lance Corporal Danny Martinez called over his shoulder, using the call sign she'd earned 3 months earlier when she'd saved 6 Marines during a brutal firefight in Asadabad. Sarah gave him a thumbs up, her eyes constantly scanning the ridgelands above. Something felt wrong. The valley was too quiet. No birds. No sounds of village life echoing from the compounds ahead. Just silence. "Stay sharp, people," Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Intel says Taliban activity in this area has." The world exploded into chaos. Machine gun fire erupted from 3 positions on the ridgelines, the distinctive hammering of PKM guns tearing into the Marine formation. Bullets kicked up geysers of dirt and stone. Men screamed. Sarah's training took over instantly, her body moving before her mind could process the danger. She sprinted forward as Marines dove for cover, their return fire echoing off the valley walls. Corpsman up." The desperate cry came from the front of the patrol. Sarah ran toward it, her medical bag bouncing violently against her hip. Bullets cracked past her head with supersonic snaps, but she didn't slow down. Through the dust and smoke, she saw him, Lance Corporal Martinez, the same Marine who joked with her moments earlier, now lying in the open with blood spreading across his chest. Sarah slid beside him like a baseball player stealing home, her hands already tearing open his body armor. "I got you, Danny. Stay with me." The 19-year-old's eyes were wide with shock, his breathing rapid and shallow. Sucking chest wound. She ripped open a chest seal, pressing it against the wound as bullets continued to snap overhead. Martinez grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Sarah, I can't breathe." "Yes, you can. Look at me, Danny. You're going home. You're going to see that girl in your wallet again." She worked with practiced precision, sealing the wound, establishing an IV line even as the firefight raged around them. Marines laid down suppressive fire, trying to cover her position, but the enemy had them in a perfect kill zone. Then Sarah heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. The high-pitched beep of a pressure plate IED, triggered by a Marine's boot just meters away. "Get down!" The explosion was a physical force that picked Sarah up and threw her like a rag doll. She hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, her vision filled with stars. Hot pain lanced through her left leg, sharp, terrible, all-consuming. She tried to stand, but her leg wouldn't respond. Looking down, she saw the damage. Shrapnel had torn through her calf, the fabric of her uniform shredded and soaked with blood. Bone fragments were visible through the torn flesh. The logical part of her brain cataloged the injury clinically. Severe soft tissue damage, possible fractured tibia, significant blood loss imminent. But another part of her, the part that had taken the corpsman's oath, registered something more important. Danny Martinez was still lying where she'd left him, and 2 more Marines were down from the IED blast. Sarah dragged herself back to Martinez, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. Her medical bag had been destroyed in the explosion, supplies scattered across the blast radius. She tore a strip from her own uniform sleeve, fashioning a hasty tourniquet around her leg with shaking hands. The pain was excruciating, but she'd dealt with pain before. Marines were dying, and pain was just a signal to ignore. "Doc, you're hit." Sergeant Williams appeared beside her, his face covered in dust and blood. "I'm fine. Help me get these Marines to cover." They worked together, dragging the wounded into a dried riverbed that offered minimal protection. More Marines gathered, forming a defensive perimeter as the Taliban fire intensified. Sarah moved from casualty to casualty, using supplies from other Marines' individual first aid kits since her bag was destroyed. One Marine had a severed femoral artery. She pressed her hand directly into the wound, applying pressure while talking him through the shock. Another had severe burns from the IED. A third was unconscious, his breathing shallow. Captain Morrison slid into the riverbed beside her, his radio operator close behind. "Angel 6, what's your status?" "3 urgent surgical, 4 priority," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the pain screaming through her leg. "Sir, we need medevac now or we're going to lose them." Morrison's face was grim as he looked at the ridge lines where enemy fighters were repositioning. "Weather's closing in. Helicopters can't fly in these conditions. We're on our own until it clears." Sarah looked at the wounded Marine surrounding her, then at the darkening sky above. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the Taliban fighters calling to each other, their positions tightening around the trapped Marines like a noose. 18 men, including herself. 3 critically wounded who wouldn't survive the night without advanced medical care. And no way out. She checked her watch. They had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. 4 hours to hold this position against an enemy force that was growing by the minute. 4 hours before the wounded began to die. Sarah cinched the tourniquet tighter on her own leg, biting back a scream as bone fragments ground together. She picked up her M4 rifle, checking the magazine. 3 full mags left. Not much, but it would have to do. "Angel 6, Martinez whispered, his hand finding hers. "Are we going to make it?" Sarah squeezed his hand, forcing confidence into her voice that she didn't feel. "Yeah, Danny, we're all going home, I promise." As darkness began to fall over the Valley of Death, Sarah Chen had no idea that keeping that promise would require her to do the impossible, and that by sunrise, her name would be whispered with reverence by every Marine who served in those mountains. The real fight was just beginning. Night fell over the valley like a black curtain, bringing with it a cold that seeped into Sarah's bones. She'd been applying pressure to wounds for 3 hours straight, her hands cramped and covered in blood. The Taliban fire had slackened as darkness settled, but she could hear them out there, voices calling in Pashto, the scrape of boots on rock, the metallic click of weapons being reloaded. They were waiting, regrouping, preparing for something. Captain Morrison crouched beside her, his face illuminated by the green glow of his night vision device. "How are they holding up?" Sarah glanced at the 3 critical casualties. Martinez was stable for now, but his breathing was getting shallower. Corporal Jackson had lost too much blood, his pulse was thready, his skin cold and clammy. PFC Rodriguez kept slipping in and out of consciousness, mumbling his mother's name in Spanish. "They need a trauma surgeon, sir, not a corpsman with a destroyed aid bag." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "How long until medevac?" "Weather's still socked in. Brass is working on alternatives." Morrison's expression said what his words didn't. There might not be any alternatives. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back despair. Her own leg throbbed with every heartbeat, the makeshift tourniquet doing its job, but the pain was becoming unbearable. She'd give anything for morphine right now, but she'd used the last of it on Jackson an hour ago. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. The soft crunch of footsteps in gravel moving with practiced stealth. Not Taliban. These movements were too disciplined, too careful. The Marines around her tensed, weapons raised. "Friendly coming in," a low voice called from the darkness. "Chief Petty Officer Wade, SEAL Team 7, don't shoot." 4 shapes materialized from the shadows like ghosts, their movements fluid and silent. Sarah had worked with SEALs before and recognized the telltale signs. High-end kit, suppressed weapons, faces painted with camouflage. The lead operator, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s with hard eyes, moved directly to Morrison. "Captain, I'm Chief Wade. We inserted 2 clicks north an hour ago. Our mission was to neutralize the machine gun positions, but intel was wrong about enemy strength." Wade's voice was calm, professional, but his eyes were constantly moving, assessing threats. We're looking at 60-plus Taliban fighters, possibly more moving in from surrounding villages. They've got you boxed in tight. Can you take out those gun positions? Morrison asked. Wade shook his head. Not without air support or a lot more bodies. They're dug in, overlapping fields of fire, and they know we're here now. Sir, this position is indefensible. We need to move to higher ground, establish a defensible perimeter until we can get extraction. Sarah's heart sank. Moving meant carrying the wounded up a mountainside, through enemy-controlled terrain, in complete darkness. With her leg destroyed, she'd slow them down or require someone to carry her. That meant fewer people available to fight or carry the critical casualties. How do we move 3 litter-urgent casualties plus walking wounded up that mountain? Morrison gestured at the rocky slope behind them. We carry them. My boys are strong. Wade turned, his eyes falling on Sarah for the first time. He took in her blood-soaked uniform, the crude tourniquet, the way she was sitting to keep weight off her injured leg. Corpsman, can you walk? Sarah tried to stand, using her rifle as a crutch. Her leg buckled immediately, white-hot agony shooting up her spine. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. I can manage, Chief. Wade's expression said he knew she was lying. He turned to one of his teammates, a massive operator carrying a Mk-48 machine gun. Haas, you're with the corpsman. Help her move. Negative, Chief. Sarah's voice was stronger than she felt. Your man needs both hands free to fight. I'll slow you down. The critical casualties can't walk at all. They need carriers more than I do. Wade studied her for a long moment, his tactical mind clearly calculating odds and assets. Finally, he made a decision that Sarah saw register in his eyes before he spoke. Corpsman, I need you to hide in those rocks. He pointed to an outcropping about 30 meters away, well concealed but isolated from the main group. We'll move the able-bodied and critical casualties up the mountain. Once we establish a secure perimeter, I'll send someone back for you. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. If things went bad, if they got hit during the movement, no one would come back. She'd be on her own. Chief, I can. That's an order, corpsman. Wade's voice softened slightly. You've kept these Marines alive this long. Let us do our job now. Get to those rocks, stay quiet, stay hidden. We will come back for you. The SEALs began organizing the withdrawal with quiet efficiency. Marines fashioned litters from ponchos and broken tree branches. The walking wounded checked their ammunition. Sergeant Williams appeared beside Sarah, his face troubled. Doc, this ain't right. We don't leave people behind. I'm not being left, Sergeant. I'm providing a reserve position. Sarah forced a smile she didn't feel. Now help me get to those rocks before the chief changes his mind and makes you carry me. Williams helped her hobble to the outcropping, her destroyed leg dragging uselessly. The pain was so intense now that she was starting to see spots in her vision. He settled her behind a large boulder, pressing 2 extra magazines for her M4 into her hands. You stay alive, Doc. That's an order from a lowly sergeant. I'll do my best. Sarah gripped his hand. Take care of Martinez for me. Keep talking to him, keep him conscious. Williams nodded, his throat working. Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness. Sarah watched through her night vision device as the SEALs and Marines began their climb. Chief Wade took point, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. His team spread out, providing security. Marines carried the litters, struggling over the rocky terrain. She counted them, 18 souls, including the 4 SEALs, moving up the mountainside toward what they hoped was safety. Then she saw them. Through the green glow of her night vision, Taliban fighters were repositioning on the ridgeline above the climbing Americans. At least 15 men, moving to set up an ambush. The Marines were heading straight into a kill zone, and they had no idea. Sarah grabbed for her radio, but the shattered device was useless. She'd known that for hours. She tried to shout, but the wind was wrong, her voice wouldn't carry. She watched in horror as the Taliban fighters settled into positions, their weapons trained on the trail the Marines were following. In approximately 3 minutes, everyone she'd fought to save would walk into an ambush and die. Sarah looked at her M4 rifle, then at the distance to the nearest Taliban fighter. 800 meters, maybe more, far beyond the effective range of her weapon, an impossible shot in daylight, let alone at night, with a carbine not designed for precision shooting at distance, by a corpsman, not a sniper, with a body racked by shock and blood loss. Impossible. But Sarah's father had been a Marine Corps Scout sniper instructor at Camp Pendleton. She'd grown up on the range, learning the fundamentals before she could ride a bike. "Sarah," he'd always said, "shooting isn't about the weapon, it's about breathing, patience, and will. The weapon is just a tool, you are the weapon." Sarah dragged herself into a stable shooting position, her ruined legs screaming in protest. She flipped down her night vision monocular, settling her eye behind the M4's holographic sight. Through the optic, she found the lead Taliban fighter, the one who would give the signal to open fire. Her hands shook from shock and pain. She forced them steady. Her breathing was ragged. She controlled it. Her vision swam. She blinked it clear. 800 meters, impossible range, uphill shot, crosswind from the east. Sarah thought of Martinez, 19 years old with a girlfriend waiting in California. Of Jackson with his newborn son he'd never met. Of Rodriguez who called his mother every Sunday. Of 18 Marines climbing toward death. She elevated her aim, accounting for bullet drop, adjusted for wind, let her heartbeat settle into the space between seconds. "It's not the weapon, Dad," she whispered. "It's the warrior." Sarah Chen squeezed the trigger. The M4 carbine bucked against Sarah's shoulder, the suppressed crack echoing off the valley walls. For a single heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Through her night vision scope, Sarah watched the 5.56 round arc through the darkness, traveling across impossible distance. 800 meters, a shot that shouldn't work with this weapon, a shot that defied every technical manual and ballistic chart. The lead Taliban fighter dropped like a stone. Sarah didn't allow herself to feel relief. She was already acquiring her next target, her training taking over where conscious thought left off. The Taliban formation erupted into chaos, fighters shouting and scrambling for cover, trying to locate the shooter. They were looking in the wrong direction, toward the climbing Marines, not behind them where a lone corpsman lay bleeding in the rocks. "Angel to actual," she whispered uselessly to her dead radio, wishing she could warn Chief Wade. "Tango down, multiple hostiles, you're 12 o'clock high." Through her scope, Sarah identified the next threat, a machine gunner settling behind a PKM, his assistant feeding the belt. They were setting up to rake the mountainside where the Marines were climbing. The gunner was even farther than her first target, 900 meters, partially concealed behind a rock formation. The wind had shifted, blowing harder from the east. This shot was even more impossible than the first. Sarah's leg throbbed with each heartbeat, the tourniquet cutting off circulation, nerve damage sending lightning bolts of agony up her spine. She could feel blood pooling beneath her, warm and sticky. The cold mountain air made her shiver, and she knew shock was setting in. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from a day at the range when she was 12 years old. "Sarah, when your body wants to quit, when everything hurts, when the shot seems impossible, that's when you find out what you're made of. That's when breathing matters most. In, out, slow, controlled. Let your heartbeat tell you when to shoot. Between beats, between breaths, there's a moment of perfect stillness. That's when you take the shot." Sarah breathed, in, out. Her vision narrowed to just the scope picture, the machine gunner's head partially visible behind the rock. She elevated her aim, visualizing the bullet's arc, accounted for the crosswind by aiming 2 body widths left. Let her finger rest on the trigger, feeling for that space between heartbeats. Squeeze. The machine gunner's head snapped back. His body slumped forward onto the weapon. His assistant stared in shock for a moment, then reached for the gun to take over. Sarah had already chambered another round. The assistant dropped before his hands touched the PKM. 2 shots, 2 kills, 900 meters. The Taliban fighters were in complete disarray now, diving for cover, shouting warnings to each other. Sarah could hear the panic in their voices even from this distance. They still hadn't located her position. To them, death was coming from nowhere, silent and precise. Sarah scanned for new targets. A group of 5 fighters was moving to flank the Marines' route, using a dried creek bed for cover. The lead man was barking orders, directing the others. 700 meters, moving target, harder shot. She led him slightly, anticipating his movement, fired. He went down mid-stride. The other 4 fighters froze, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Sarah made the decision for them. 4 shots, methodical and calm. 4 more bodies in the creek bed. 7 enemy fighters eliminated in less than 2 minutes. On the mountainside, Chief Wade had stopped moving. Through his thermal optic, he'd watched impossible shots materialize from somewhere in the valley below. His years of experience told him what was happening, even if his mind struggled to accept it. He keyed his radio to his team. Actual to all elements, we have Overwatch. Unknown friendly providing precision fire from our 6 o'clock low. Estimate 7 to 9 tangos neutralized. One of his SEALs, a sniper named Collins, responded with disbelief in his voice. Chief, I'm tracking the shots on thermal. They're coming from where we left the corpsman. That's impossible. She's got an M4, not a sniper system. Those ranges. I don't care if she's throwing rocks, Collins. Someone just saved our asses. Keep moving. Get these Marines to the rally point. Wade turned his optic back to Sarah's position, and what he saw made his blood run cold. At least 20 Taliban fighters had pinpointed her location from the muzzle flashes. They were converging from 3 directions, moving with purpose. The corpsman had bought them time and saved their lives, but she just painted a giant target on her isolated position. Chief, we need to. His point man started. Keep moving, Wade ordered, though every instinct screamed at him to go back. Get the wounded to safety. That's the mission. But his jaw was clenched tight and his eyes never left the valley below. In her fighting position, Sarah saw them coming. Her M4's magazine was half empty. She had 2 more full magazines, 60 rounds total, against at least 20 fighters who were now actively hunting her. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even with perfect shot placement, she didn't have enough ammunition. But the Marines were still climbing, still exposed, still needed time. Sarah checked her watch. Chief Wade needed 5 more minutes to get everyone to cover on the high ground. 5 minutes might as well be 5 hours. She chambered a fresh round and found her next target through the scope. A Taliban fighter was bounding between rocks, moving fast toward her position, 400 meters and closing. Sarah led him, fired. He tumbled into the dirt. Another fighter appeared, trying to use his fallen comrade's cover. 350 meters. Sarah's shot caught him in the chest. The enemy fire intensified. AK-47 rounds cracked past her position, striking the rocks around her with sharp impacts. Stone chips peppered her face, opening small cuts. She tasted blood and dust. A PKM machine gun opened up, stitching a line of fire across her boulder. The heavy rounds chewed into the rock, showering her with fragments. Sarah rolled to a new position within the outcropping, her ruined leg dragging behind her. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body. She bit down on her sleeve to keep from screaming, tears streaming down her face. But her hands remained steady as she brought the rifle back up. Through the scope, she identified the PKM gunner. 600 meters, firing from a prone position. Difficult shot, but not impossible. Not anymore. Nothing was impossible when Marines' lives hung in the balance. She aimed for center mass, compensated for the distance and fired. The machine gun went silent. Angel 6, you beautiful crazy person. she heard Sergeant Williams' voice crackle over the platoon frequency. They must have gotten far enough away that their radios could reach each other again. "We're almost to cover. 30 seconds." 30 seconds. Sarah could do 30 seconds. A group of Taliban fighters rushed her position, 3 men moving together, suppressing her with automatic fire. 200 meters. Sarah switched her M4 to burst mode, knowing she couldn't afford precision anymore. She fired into the group, saw at least 2 go down. The third dove behind a rock. More fighters were closing in. She could hear them shouting, coordinating their assault. 150 meters. 100. Her hand dropped to her sidearm, checking that it was ready. When the M4 ran dry, that Beretta M9 would be all she had left. "Angel 6, we're in cover," Williams' voice shouted. "All personnel accounted for, get out of there." Sarah allowed herself a small smile despite the pain, despite the fear. They'd made it. All 18 Marines and SEALs were safe because she'd bought them 5 minutes with impossible shots. But getting out wasn't an option anymore. Her leg was useless. The Taliban fighters were within 100 meters and closing from 3 sides. She had maybe 15 rounds left in her current magazine. Sarah's father had taught her many things about shooting, but he'd also taught her about sacrifice, about holding the line when retreat wasn't possible, about making the last stand count. She settled the rifle against her shoulder, finding her next target through the scope. Her breathing was labored now, shock and blood loss catching up with her, but her aim remained true. "Come on then," Sarah whispered to the approaching fighters. "Let's see what you've got." The Taliban closed in, and Sarah Chen prepared to sell her life as dearly as possible. She'd saved 18 Marines. If this valley became her grave, it was a worthy place to fall. But in the darkness above, Chief Marcus Wade was making a very different calculation. He just witnessed a wounded corpsman make shots that even his trained snipers would struggle to replicate. Shots that had saved every man in his formation. And Chief Wade had never left anyone behind in 20 years of combat. He wasn't about to start now. Sarah's world had narrowed to a tunnel. The scope, the trigger, the breath between heartbeats, everything else, the pain, the cold, the approaching death, faded into background noise. She was operating on pure instinct now. Her father's training burned so deep into her muscle memory that conscious thought wasn't necessary. 75 meters. A Taliban fighter sprinted between 2 rocks, his AK-47 held high. Sarah tracked him smoothly, led him by half a body length, squeezed. He went down hard. 50 meters. 2 fighters moved together, trying to flank her position from the east. She fired twice in rapid succession. Both dropped. The M4's bolt locked back on an empty magazine. Sarah ejected it with practiced speed, her fingers finding the fresh magazine on her vest despite the trembling in her hands. 2 magazines left. 40 rounds between her and the end. "Corpsman Chen, this is Chief Wade." The voice in her damaged radio crackled with interference, but she could just make it out. "If you can hear this, we're coming back for you. Hold position. 2 mics." 2 minutes. Sarah almost laughed. In 2 minutes, the Taliban would overrun her position. They were close enough now that she could see their faces through the night vision. Young men, older men, all with the same determined expression. They knew they had her trapped. They were just deciding how many of them wanted to die taking her. But 2 minutes was an eternity in combat. 2 minutes was time enough to make them pay dearly. A Taliban commander emerged from cover 50 meters away, waving his men forward with sharp gestures. He was older than the others, gray in his beard, wearing a distinctive white turban, clearly experienced, clearly in charge. Sarah centered the holographic sight on his chest and fired. The commander crumpled, and the coordinated assault faltered as fighters looked around in confusion, their leadership suddenly decapitated. Sarah used the hesitation to scan for new threats. Her thermal vision picked up heat signatures moving through the rocks to her north, at least 8 fighters trying to circle behind her position. They were smarter now, using the terrain, moving in pairs with covering fire. They'd learned to respect the lone shooter who'd already killed so many of their brothers. 45 seconds, she whispered to herself, checking her watch. 45 seconds until Chief Wade and his team would be in position, if she could just hold until then. A burst of PKM fire raked her position, heavy 7.62 rounds pulverizing the rocks around her. Sarah pressed herself flat as stone fragments flew like shrapnel. One piece opened a cut above her eye, blood running down into her vision. She wiped it away with her sleeve, leaving a red smear across her face. When the firing paused, she popped up and immediately spotted the machine gunner. 40 meters behind a low wall of rocks, his assistant feeding a fresh belt. Too close for precision shooting. Sarah switched to full automatic and emptied half her magazine into their position. The gun went silent. 20 rounds left, 30 seconds. Taliban fighters were closing from 3 sides now, emboldened by their numbers. Sarah could hear their boots on gravel, their harsh breathing, urgent commands in Pashto. 20 meters to her east, 15 to her north. They were going to rush her position simultaneously, overwhelm her with sheer numbers. She pulled a fragmentation grenade from her vest, her last one, yanked the pin, counted to 2, threw it toward the northern group. The explosion lit up the night, screams following the blast, but the eastern group kept coming. 15 rounds, 20 seconds. Sarah fired in controlled bursts, dropping 2 more fighters. The survivors dove for cover. She used the moment to change position within her outcropping, dragging her useless leg behind her. The movement left a dark smear of blood on the rocks. She was running out of blood almost as fast as she was running out of ammunition. Her vision swam. She shook her head violently, trying to clear it. Couldn't pass out, not yet, just a few more seconds. 10 rounds, 10 seconds. A Taliban fighter appeared at the edge of her position, his AK-47 swinging toward her. Sarah fired first, point-blank range. He fell backwards. Another fighter tried to follow. She shot him too. The M4's bolt locked back. Empty. Sarah dropped the rifle and drew her Beretta M9 pistol with shaking hands. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. The fighters knew she was out of rifle ammunition. She could hear them calling to each other, their voices excited, victorious. 8 fighters rose from cover and began advancing on her position in a coordinated rush. 20 meters, 15. Sarah raised her pistol, knowing she couldn't stop them all. Then the night exploded with suppressed gunfire. The advancing Taliban fighters jerked and spun like marionettes as bullets struck them from an unexpected angle. Sarah's head whipped around to see 4 shapes materializing from the darkness above, SEALs, moving down the mountainside with lethal precision. Chief Wade was in the lead, his suppressed HK-416 speaking in controlled bursts. His teammates spread out in a perfect support-by-fire formation, their night vision and superior training turning the ambush around in seconds. Covering fire, Wade shouted. Haas Martinez, get to the corpsman. 2 massive shapes bounded down toward Sarah's position while Wade and his sniper, Collins, laid down devastating precision fire. The remaining Taliban fighters scattered, caught between the SEALs' superior firepower and their dead comrades scattered across the rocks. The first SEAL to reach her was Haas, the big machine gunner she'd seen earlier. He slid into her fighting position like he was sliding into home plate, his MK-48 immediately swinging to cover the eastern approach. Right behind him came a Marine, Lance Corporal Danny Martinez, the same Marine she'd saved from the sucking chest wound hours earlier. His face was pale but determined, his rifle held ready. Angel 6, Martinez shouted over the gunfire, "We got you." Sarah tried to respond, but her voice wouldn't work. Her pistol slipped from her numb fingers. She'd been running on adrenaline and willpower, and both had just run out. Her body was shutting down from blood loss and shock. Holy hell, Haas breathed, seeing the carnage around her position. Corpsman, you did all this. Sarah managed a weak nod. Her vision was graying at the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. She felt Martinez's hands on her, checking her wounds, his medic training kicking in even though he was still wounded himself. "Chief, she's in bad shape," Martinez called. "Severe blood loss, possible hypovolemic shock. Tourniquet's been on too long, legs cold, no distal pulse." "Get her on a litter," Wade ordered, still firing in controlled pairs. "Collins, suppressive fire on that ridgeline. Haas, cover our six." Strong hands lifted Sarah onto a makeshift litter. Through her fatting vision, she saw the SEALs working with brutal efficiency. Collins's sniper rifle barked methodically, each shot dropping a Taliban fighter trying to reposition. Wade was on his radio, coordinating with the Marines on the high ground. Haas's machine gun chattered in short bursts, keeping the enemy's heads down. "The Marines," Sarah whispered, her hand grasping Martinez's sleeve. "Did they? All of them?" "Every single one, Doc." Martinez's voice was thick with emotion. "Every single Marine made it because of you. Now it's your turn." They began moving up the mountainside, 2 SEALs carrying the litter while the others provided covering fire. Wade and Collins moved in leapfrog fashion, one covering while the other displaced, then switching. It was a textbook tactical withdrawal, executed perfectly under fire. Sarah felt herself being carried, the motion making her legs scream in fresh agony. She bit her lip until it bled, refusing to cry out and distract the men saving her life. Through the haze of pain, she heard the firefight continuing below, the SEALs' disciplined fire versus the Taliban's wild bursts. "Contact right," Haas bellowed, his machine gun roaring in response. 3 tangos, 200 meters. Wade pivoted smoothly, his rifle finding targets. "Got 'em, keep moving." 50 meters, 75. The sounds of battle began to fade as they climbed higher. Sarah's consciousness was slipping away like water through her fingers. She fought to stay aware, but her body had other ideas. It had taken too much damage, lost too much blood. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Chief Wade's voice, calm and certain despite the chaos. "Radio medevac. Tell them Angel 6 is coming home. And tell them she just made 23 confirmed kills at ranges up to 900 meters with a goddamn M4 carbine. They're going to want to hear this story." Sarah's lips moved in a ghost of a smile. 23. She'd made every shot count. 18 Marines were alive because she'd refused to hide when the SEALs ordered her to, because she'd taken impossible shots and made them possible through sheer will. Her father would be proud. Then the darkness took her and Sarah Chen knew nothing more. Sarah's consciousness flickered like a dying candle, pulling her back from the void in fragments. Pain came first, a white-hot scream from her shattered leg that shocked her awake. Then sounds, the rhythmic thump of boots on rock, labored breathing, the distant crack of gunfire. She forced her eyes open and saw the night sky spinning above her, stars wheeling in dizzying circles. "She's awake." Martinez's face appeared in her vision, upside down as he ran alongside the litter. "Doc, stay with us." "Where?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, her throat desert dry. "Almost to the rally point," Martinez panted. 200 meters, just hang on." Sarah tried to nod, but the movement sent waves of nausea through her. She could feel the litter bearers struggling with her weight on the steep terrain, their breathing harsh and rapid. Chief Wade appeared beside them, moving backwards while maintaining security down the mountain, his rifle ready. "Contact rear," Collins's voice cut through the darkness. His sniper rifle barked once, twice. "Tango's attempting to pursue. I count." "Jesus, Chief, there's more coming. Vehicle convoy on the valley road, technical with a heavy machine gun." Wade cursed under his breath. "How many?" "At least 20 reinforcements. ETA 5 minutes to our position." The numbers didn't add up. Even with the SEALs' superior skills and the high ground advantage, they were now looking at 40-plus Taliban fighters who were angry, organized, and hunting for revenge. The isolated corpsmen who'd slaughtered their brothers had become a priority target, and they were bringing serious firepower to finish the job. "Double time," Wade ordered. "Get to the Marines' position now." The litter-bearers increased their pace, practically running up the mountainside. Sarah gritted her teeth as each jostling step sent lightning through her destroyed leg. She could feel the tourniquet cutting deeper, feel the absence of sensation below it. Her foot was dying, tissue necrotizing from lack of blood flow. In a hospital, they'd be racing to save the limb. Out here, they were just trying to save her life. They crested the ridge and Sarah saw the Marines' hasty defensive position, a natural depression in the rocks with good fields of fire down all approaches. Sergeant Williams had organized them well. Crew-served weapons at the corners, riflemen spread in a perimeter, the wounded collected in the center with the last remaining corpsmen working on them. "Clear the landing zone," someone shouted. "Medevac inbound 2 minutes." Sarah's heart leaped. A helicopter, medical care, survival. But then she heard the sound that killed that hope, the heavy thump of a DSHK heavy machine gun opening up from the valley below. The 12.7 rounds cracked overhead with sounds like freight trains, far more powerful than the AK-47s and PKMs they'd been facing. A technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, had reached a position with line of sight to the ridge. "Everybody down," Wade roared as the heavy rounds chewed into the rocks, throwing up massive chunks of stone. The DSHK could punch through light cover like it was paper. "Medevac, abort, abort, abort. Landing zone is hot. We are under heavy fire." The distant sound of helicopter rotors banked away, denying them extraction. Sarah was laid on the ground in the center of the perimeter. The SEAL medic, a wiry man named Porter, immediately went to work on her leg. He cut away the tourniquet she'd applied hours ago, and Sarah screamed as blood flow returned to the damaged tissue. The pain was indescribable, worse than the initial injury. "Compound fracture, severe soft tissue damage, possible compartment syndrome," Porter muttered, working quickly. He started an IV, pushed fluids and antibiotics. "Corpsman, I'm not going to lie to you. This leg is bad. Even if we get you out in the next hour, you might still lose it." "Don't care," Sarah gasped between waves of agony. "The Marines, did they all?" "Every single one is accounted for," Porter said firmly, meeting her eyes. "You saved 18 lives tonight, Chen. That's a pretty good day's work." The DSHK continued firing in bursts, keeping the medevac at bay. Chief Wade was on the radio, his voice controlled but urgent. "Hammer 6, this is Raptor 1. We need immediate close air support on that technical. Grid coordinates follow." Minutes crawled by. The Taliban were probing the perimeter now, testing the defenses with sporadic rifle fire. The Marines returned fire, their training evident in their discipline. No one wasted ammunition. Every shot had a purpose. Sarah watched it all through a haze of pain and medication. Porter had given her morphine, and the world had taken on a dreamlike quality. She saw Martinez arguing with Sergeant Williams, insisting he was well enough to fight despite his chest wound. Saw 3 other Marines she'd treated earlier manning fighting positions, bandaged but determined. Saw the critical casualties, Jackson, Rodriguez, and a PFC named Thompson, lying nearby, their breathing shallow but steady. All alive, because of 5 minutes. 5 minutes she'd bought them with impossible shots from an impossible position. "Sarah," a hand squeezed hers gently. She turned her head to see Captain Morrison kneeling beside her. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, exhaustion evident in every line, but his eyes were clear. "I need you to know something. When we get out of here, and we will get out of here, I'm putting you in for the Navy Cross. What you did tonight. I've been a Marine for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Sarah tried to speak, but her voice failed. Morrison continued. Chief Wade pulled the night vision footage from his helmet cam. "You made 23 confirmed kills at ranges between 400 and 900 meters, with an M4, while wounded and in shock. The Corps is going to study what you did tonight for years." Just did my job, Sarah finally managed. No, Korsman, you did something impossible, and you saved every Marine under my command. Morrison's voice cracked slightly. We don't forget that, ever. An explosion rocked the valley below. A Hellfire missile from a Predator drone had found the technical. The DSHK fell silent, its crew vaporized. Moments later, Wade's voice rang out. Medevac is inbound. Prepare for immediate extraction. The distinctive thump of a Black Hawk's rotors grew louder. Marines popped smoke grenades, marking the landing zone. The helicopter came in fast and low, its door gunners laying down suppressive fire. It touched down for barely 30 seconds. Hands lifted Sarah's litter, rushing her toward the helicopter. She caught glimpses of faces. Martinez, Williams, Morrison, the SEALs, all the Marines she'd fought to save. Through the morphine haze, she saw them watching her, and in their eyes she saw something that made her chest tight: respect, gratitude, and the knowledge that they owed her their lives. The crew chief pulled her into the helicopter. Porter jumped in beside her, already hooking up fresh IV bags. The Black Hawk lifted off immediately, banking hard away from the mountain. Through the open door, Sarah saw the fire base lights in the distance, growing larger. Safety, medical care, survival. She'd held the line, made the impossible shots, saved 18 lives. As the helicopter raced through the night towards surgical teams and trauma bays, Sarah Chen finally allowed herself to believe she might actually live to tell this story. Her leg was destroyed, her body broken, but she'd done what she'd promised Martinez in that riverbed hours ago. They were all going home. The darkness claimed her again, but this time it was the gentle darkness of medical sedation, not the cold void of death. And in that darkness, Sarah dreamed of her father's face, proud and smiling, telling her one more time, "It's not the weapon, sweetheart, it's the warrior." Black Hawk's rotors thundered through the night as Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. Porter, the SEAL medic, worked over her with focused intensity, his hands moving efficiently even as the helicopter banked and weaved to avoid potential ground fire. Through the haze of morphine, Sarah heard fragments of radio chatter, urgent voices coordinating her care. "Bagram, this is Dustoff 37. We have one urgent surgical female Navy corpsman. Massive lower extremity trauma, class 3 hemorrhage. Patient received field transfusion and morphine." The helicopter touched down at Bagram Airfield's trauma center with a jarring thud. Instantly, a team of doctors and nurses swarmed the bird. Sarah felt herself being transferred to a gurney, bright lights overhead making her squint. Hands were everywhere checking vitals, starting new IVs, cutting away what remained of her uniform. Corpsman Sarah Chen, age 28, Porter was saying rapidly to the trauma surgeon. Compound tib-fib fracture from IED fragmentation, tourniquet applied for approximately 6 hours, distal circulation compromised. She's received 2 liters of saline, morphine 10 milligrams, and... "Get her to OR2 immediately," the surgeon interrupted. "Alert vascular and ortho. We might still save this leg if we move fast." Sarah tried to speak, to tell them she didn't care about the leg, to ask if the Marines made it. But a mask descended over her face, pumping anesthesia, and the world dissolved into chemical darkness. 3 hours later, Captain Morrison stood on the ridge with the remainder of his company, waiting for the CH-47 Chinook that would extract them. The firefight was over. The Taliban had withdrawn after the Predator strike, melting back into the mountains as they always did. The sun was beginning to rise over the Hindu Kush, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Chief Wade approached him, sat down on a boulder without asking permission. For a moment, neither man spoke, just watched the sunrise together in the way that warriors do after surviving the night. "Your corpsman is something else," Wade finally said. Morrison nodded slowly. "I almost left her behind. When you said to pull back, I was thinking tactically. Numbers, assets, the mission." "And she was thinking about Marines," Wade finished. That's the difference between good leaders and great ones. She knew what mattered. 23 kills, Morrison said, still struggling to process it. I watched the helmet cam footage you sent to command. Those shots shouldn't be possible, Chief. Not with an M4, not at those ranges, not by someone who's not even a designated marksman. Wade pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages of tactical notes. I did the math during the extract. Her first kill was at 817 meters according to my rangefinder. Her farthest was 943 meters, that machine gunner on the North Ridge. She had a 43% hit rate at ranges exceeding 700 meters with a weapon that has an effective range of 500. How? Morrison asked simply. I asked Porter about her during the flight back. He said her father was a Marine Scout sniper instructor at Camp Pendleton. Master Gunnery Sergeant Chen retired. Apparently she grew up on the rifle range. Wade shook his head slowly. But skill only explains so much. What she did required something else. Something you can't teach. Will to live. Will to save, Wade corrected. There's a difference. She wasn't fighting for herself. Every shot she took was buying time for your Marines. When I looked back at that valley through thermals and saw her alone against 20-plus tangos, I knew she was going to die. The math doesn't lie, but she kept shooting anyway. Morrison's throat tightened. We don't deserve people like her. No, Wade agreed, but we sure as hell need them. The Chinook appeared on the horizon, its twin rotors beating the air. As it approached, Sergeant Williams walked over, Martinez limping beside him. The lance corporal's chest was heavily bandaged, but he'd refused to be evacuated until the rest of the company was accounted for. Sir, Martinez said, his young face older somehow than it had been yesterday morning. The Marines want to do something for Doc Chen. We were thinking. Whatever it is, approved, Morrison interrupted. Williams pulled out a folded piece of paper, crude but clearly heartfelt. Someone had drawn an angel with a rifle, wings spread protectively over a group of tiny figures. Below it, in careful block letters, Angel 6, she held the line. We're all getting this tattooed, Williams explained. Every Marine she saved. It's a promise that we won't forget, that we'll live lives worthy of what she did for us. Morrison felt his eyes burning. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Chief Wade stood, extending his hand to Morrison. Your corpsman just set a standard, Captain. The question is whether the rest of us can live up to it. As they loaded onto the Chinook, Morrison looked back at the valley one last time. Somewhere down there, Taliban fighters were burying their dead, 23 men killed by a wounded woman who refused to hide. The story would spread through these mountains, becoming legend. The Americans would remember it too, but differently. They would remember the corpsman who became a warrior when her Marines needed her most. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the valley of death. But in the seats, 18 Marines sat quietly, each lost in their own thoughts about the woman who'd saved them all. Martinez pulled out his wallet, extracting a photo of his girlfriend. On the back, in fresh ink, he'd written 4 words, I'm alive because of Angel 6. It was a debt he'd spend the rest of his life trying to repay. In the operating room at Bagram, Sarah Chen's surgery entered its 5th hour. The vascular surgeon had managed to restore blood flow to her leg. The orthopedic surgeon was now painstakingly reconstructing shattered bone. The prognosis was uncertain. She'd walk again, probably, but how well remained to be seen. But she'd live, and 18 Marines would live, and in the arithmetic of war, that was a victory worth any price. The trauma surgeon looked at the patient on his table, this young woman who'd done the impossible in the mountains of Afghanistan. He'd been operating in combat zones for 12 years, had seen countless acts of heroism, but something about this case felt different. What do we know about her? He asked the scrub nurse. The nurse checked the chart. 28 years old, Navy corpsman assigned to 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, no previous combat decorations. She paused, reading further. Wait, there's a note here from a Chief Petty Officer Wade. Says she's being recommended for the Navy Cross. 23 enemy kills while wounded, protecting the withdrawal of 18 Marines. The surgeon's hands paused for just a moment over the surgical field. The Navy Cross, third highest military decoration, rarely awarded, almost never awarded to corpsmen who weren't supposed to be in direct combat. Well then, he said quietly, resuming his work with renewed determination, we better make sure this hero keeps her leg. For the next 3 hours, the surgical team fought to save Sarah Chen's limb with the same fierce dedication she'd shown saving her Marines. Because heroes deserved heroes too. And in the warrior culture of the American military, debts of honor were always paid. Sarah woke to whiteness. White ceiling tiles, white walls, the steady beep of monitors. For a confused moment she thought she was dead, that the valley had claimed her after all and this was some kind of afterlife. Then the pain hit, a dull throbbing ache that radiated from her left leg, and she knew she was very much alive. Easy, corpsman, don't try to move yet. A nurse appeared in her vision, checking the IV lines running into her arm. You're at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. You've been in and out for 3 days. 3 days, Sarah's voice was a raspy whisper. Her throat felt like sandpaper. They airlifted you from Bagram once you were stable enough to travel. You've had 2 surgeries so far. The doctors saved your leg, but the nurse hesitated. It's going to be a long recovery. The damage was extensive. Sarah didn't care about the leg. She grabbed the nurse's wrist with surprising strength. The Marines from the valley, did they? All 18 made it home safe, the nurse said gently, understanding immediately what mattered. Word travels fast in the military medical community. You're already famous, you know. The corpsman who made impossible shots and saved an entire platoon. Sarah sank back into the pillows, relief flooding through her. They'd made it. Martinez, Williams, Morrison, all of them. The pain, the fear, the destroyed leg, it had all been worth it. You have visitors, the nurse continued. They've been waiting for days. Military brass, other patients, reporters. But there's one group that's been here since you arrived. They sleep in the waiting room, refuse to leave. Should I? Yes, Sarah said immediately. Please. The nurse smiled and left. Minutes later, the door opened again and Sarah's breath caught. Chief Wade entered first, still in his combat uniform though cleaned of dust and blood. Behind him came Martinez, his chest bandaged but moving well. Then Williams, Thompson, Rodriguez. One by one, the Marines she'd saved filed into the room. 18 faces, some bandaged, all exhausted, every one of them alive. The room fell silent. These men had faced death together in that valley, had been carried to safety by a wounded corpsman who refused to give up. Now they stood in a German hospital room, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. Martinez stepped forward first, his eyes red-rimmed. Doc, his voice broke. He pulled something from his pocket, a Purple Heart medal. This is yours, we all agreed, you bled for us, you saved us. Martinez, I can't, Sarah started. You can and you will, Sergeant Williams interrupted firmly, moving to her bedside. He pulled down his collar, revealing fresh ink on his shoulder, the angel with a rifle they designed. We all got it, Doc. Every single Marine you saved. Angel 6 with the date, so we never forget the woman who held the line when we couldn't. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. I was just doing my job. No, Chief Wade said quietly, his command voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. You went beyond any job description that night. When I ordered you to hide, you disobeyed. When those Marines started climbing into an ambush, you made shots that shouldn't exist outside of a textbook. When you should have died alone in those rocks, you bought us time with your last rounds. He paused, pulling out a folder. This is my after-action report. It includes helmet cam footage, ballistic analysis, and testimony from everyone in that valley. I'm recommending you for the Navy Cross. The room seemed to tilt. The Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration after the Medal of Honor, given for extraordinary heroism in combat. Sarah had seen it awarded exactly once in her 7 months deployed, to a Marine who'd thrown himself on a grenade to save his squad. "Chief, I don't deserve." "You made 23 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 700 meters with a weapon not designed for that purpose," Wade interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You did this while suffering from severe blood loss, shock, and a compound fracture. You single-handedly broke up a coordinated enemy assault and enabled the successful withdrawal of 18 American service members." He met her eyes steadily. "Corpsman Chen, there are trained snipers in the special operations community who couldn't replicate what you did that night. You deserve this medal and more." Captain Morrison stepped forward, his face solemn. "Sarah, I've been a Marine for 16 years. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. I've seen Medal of Honor recipients, witnessed acts of extraordinary valor." He placed his hand over his heart. "What you did ranks among the finest moments of courage I've ever witnessed. You turned yourself into a one-woman firebase to save Marines you'd never met before that deployment. That's not just heroism. That's the embodiment of the Corpsman's creed. I will never leave a Marine behind." Rodriguez, the young private who'd been unconscious for most of the firefight, spoke up in heavily accented English. "Miss Sarah, my mama, she light candles for you every day in church. She say you are angel sent by God. I tell her she is right." Thompson, the third critical casualty, added, "My son was born 2 weeks ago. I got to FaceTime my wife from Bagram because of you. I got to see my boy's face because you didn't hide when they told you to." His voice cracked. "How do we ever repay that?" Sarah looked at their faces, these young warriors who'd become her brothers in the crucible of combat. "You already have," she said softly. "You're alive. You get to go home, see your families, live your lives. That's all the payment I need." Martinez shook his head, wiping his eyes. "It's not enough, Doc. It'll never be enough, but we're going to try anyway." He gestured to the others. "We made a pact. Every one of us is going to live a life worthy of what you did. We're going to be better men, better Marines, better fathers and husbands and sons. We're going to carry your example with us forever." "We're going to tell this story," Williams added, "so that every corpsman and every Marine knows what's possible when you refuse to quit, when you put your brothers before yourself, when you hold the line no matter the cost." Chief Wade placed a small box on Sarah's bedside table. "This is from my team. The SEALs don't forget our own, and you became one of us that night." Inside was a trident pin, the SEAL insignia. "It's not official, obviously, but my boys want you to have it. You operated at our level in that valley. Hell, you exceeded it." The door opened again and a full bird colonel entered. Sarah recognized the insignia of a surgeon. "I hate to interrupt this reunion, but Corpsman Chen needs rest. She's got another surgery scheduled for tomorrow." He looked at Sarah with professional assessment but also something like awe. "We're going to rebuild that leg as best we can. The orthopedic team thinks you'll walk again, though there will be limitations. You'll never run like before." "Will I be able to deploy again?" Sarah asked immediately. The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Most people in your situation would be asking about medical retirement, not redeployment." "I'm not most people, sir." A slight smile crossed his face. "No, Corpsman Chen, you certainly are not. Let's focus on getting you walking first. Then we'll discuss your future in the Navy." As the Marines filed out, each stopping to touch her hand or shoulder, Martinez lingered last. "Thank you," he whispered, the 2 words carrying the weight of everything unsaid. "Thank you for my life." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Thank you for making it worth saving." When they were gone, Sarah lay back and stared at the ceiling. Her leg throbbed, her body ached, her future was uncertain. But 18 Marines were alive. And in the end, that was the only number that mattered. Outside her room, Chief Wade pulled Captain Morrison aside. "The Navy Cross recommendation is going to go through. I've already had confirmation from SOCOM Command. They're fast-tracking it. Morrison nodded slowly. She's going to hate the attention. Probably, Wade agreed. But sometimes heroes don't get a choice. What she did needs to be recognized, needs to be remembered. The next generation of corpsmen and Marines need to know this story. Agreed. Morrison looked back at Sarah's closed door. You know what struck me most about that night? When I told her to hide, she nodded like she was agreeing. Then she did exactly the opposite of what I ordered. Wade chuckled darkly. Corpsmen, they follow their own rules. Good thing too, or we'd all be dead. As they walked away, neither man could know that Sarah Chen's story was just beginning. That 3 months from now, she'd stand before the Secretary of the Navy and receive the decoration she'd earned in blood and courage. That her impossible shots would be studied at Camp Pendleton Scout Sniper School. That Angel 6 would become a call sign whispered with reverence. That she'd refuse medical retirement and fight her way back to operational status. But all of that was still to come. For now, Sarah Chen slept in a German hospital bed, her leg in a cast, her body broken but her spirit undefeated. And in waiting rooms and barracks across the military world, 18 Marines carried her story forward. The legend of Angel 6 had begun. 3 months later, the California sun blazed down on Camp Pendleton's parade ground. Thousands of Marines stood in formation, dress blues immaculate, rifles at present arms. Sarah Chen stood at attention in the center, her left leg still weak, a slight limp betraying the hardware holding her bones together. But she stood tall, chin up, eyes forward. The Secretary of the Navy approached, a small blue box in his hands. Behind him, seated in the place of honor, was Sarah's father, Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert Chen, retired, his weathered face struggling to contain emotion. Beside him sat 18 Marines in dress blues, each with a small angel tattooed somewhere on their body. Attention to orders, the Secretary's voice rang across the parade ground. The citation took 5 minutes to read. Every detail of that night in the Hindu Kush, the IED blast, the impossible shots, the last stand against overwhelming odds. Sarah's mind drifted as the words washed over her. She was back in that valley, feeling the cold mountain air, the weight of the M4, the determination to buy just one more minute for her Marines. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against the enemy, the Secretary concluded, Hospitalman Second Class Sarah Chen is hereby awarded the Navy Cross. The medal was pinned to her chest, its distinctive blue and white ribbon standing out against her service dress uniform. The crowd erupted in applause, a breach of protocol that no one moved to stop. Marines cheered. Families wept. Sarah blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall during the ceremony. But when her father approached afterward, when he wrapped her in a fierce embrace, she finally broke. Dad, SHH, his voice was thick. I know, sweetheart, I know. He pulled back, hands on her shoulders, looking at her with pride that made her chest ache. Those weren't impossible shots. They were necessary shots, and you made every single one count. Martinez appeared, still moving carefully but healing well. Permission to approach, ma'am. Sarah laughed through her tears. Danny, don't you dare call me ma'am. And since when do you ask permission? Since you became the most decorated corpsman in the battalion. He grinned, then his expression turned serious. I wanted you to meet someone, he gestured, and a young woman approached, pretty, dark-haired, wearing a sundress. This is Maria, my girlfriend. We're getting married next month. He took Maria's hand. Babe, this is Doc Chen, the woman I told you about. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She hugged Sarah tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for bringing him home to me. One by one, the other Marines approached. Williams introduced his wife and 2 kids. Rodriguez showed pictures of his family in Texas. Thompson had brought his infant son, who wore a tiny onesie that read Angel 6 saved my daddy. Each introduction, each grateful face, was a reminder of why that night had mattered. Chief Wade approached last, accompanied by his SEAL team. Corpsman Chen, or should I say, the newest member of the Special Operations community. Sarah's eyes widened. Chief, I haven't even finished physical therapy. Which is why I said newest, not current. Wade handed her an envelope. Official invitation to try out for Special Operations Combat Medic training once you're cleared for full duty. Your performance in that valley proved you have what it takes. The question is whether you want it. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the envelope. Special Operations, the elite tier, the highest level of military medicine. It would mean more training, more deployments, more danger. Her leg would never be the same. The doctors had been clear about that. She'd always have pain, always have limitations. But she'd also have purpose. I want it, she said firmly. I want to be ready for the next time someone needs their angel. Wade nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. I thought you'd say that. Welcome to the program, Chen. Don't make me regret this recommendation. As the ceremony concluded and crowds dispersed, Captain Morrison found Sarah standing alone, staring at the mountains in the distance. He stood beside her in comfortable silence. Having second thoughts, he asked quietly. About what? Coming back. Most people with your injuries would take the medical retirement, go to school on the GI Bill, live a normal life. Sarah touched the Navy cross on her chest. Sir, 18 Marines are alive because I refused to quit in that valley. How many more lives could I save with better training, better equipment, better support? She met his eyes. I didn't become a corpsman to be comfortable. I became one to make a difference. Morrison smiled. The Corps is lucky to have you, Sarah. We all are. As he walked away, Sarah's father approached, moving with the deliberate pace of a man whose knees had given their best years to the Marines. He stood beside his daughter, both of them watching the sun sink toward the Pacific. Your mother would be proud, he said softly. Sarah's mother had died when she was 12, cancer, the enemy you couldn't shoot. She always said you had a warrior's heart. I learned from the best, Sarah replied, leaning against his shoulder. Those shots you made. Her father shook his head in wonder. 900 meters with an M4, in the dark, while wounded. Sarah, I taught you the fundamentals, but what you did went beyond anything I could teach. That was pure will. You taught me that too, Sarah said. You taught me that when the mission matters, when lives hang in the balance, you find a way. You make the impossible possible. Her father pulled her close. Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll come home, every time, no matter what. His voice cracked. I can't lose you too. Sarah thought about the valley, about the darkness and pain and fear, about the moment she'd chosen to fight instead of hide, about 18 faces that would have been casualty statistics if she'd made a different choice. I can't promise I'll always come home whole, she said honestly, but I can promise I'll always fight to come home, for you, for the Marines who depend on me, for every life I can still save. 6 months later, Sarah Chen reported to Special Operations training at Fort Bragg, her leg still aching but her spirit unbroken. The training was brutal, designed to break even the strongest candidates. But Sarah had already been broken in an Afghan valley and rebuilt herself through sheer determination. She graduated top of her class. 2 years after that, she deployed with a special operations unit to Syria, where she saved 9 more lives during a hostage rescue gone wrong. Then Somalia. Then Yemen. Each deployment added to her legend, but Sarah never sought the spotlight. She just did her job, keeping warriors alive in impossible situations. The angel tattoos spread beyond those original 18 Marines. Other units adopted the symbol. Other corpsmen, inspired by her story, pushed themselves harder, trained longer, refused to quit when things got difficult. What would Angel 6 do? Became a question whispered in aid stations and field hospitals across the military. On her 10th anniversary as a corpsman, Sarah returned to Camp Pendleton to speak at the graduation of a new class of Navy medical personnel. She stood before 200 young men and women about to deploy to war zones, many of whom had joined specifically because they'd heard her story. "I'm not going to tell you that being a corpsman is easy," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's not. You're going to see things that haunt you. You're going to make impossible decisions with incomplete information. You're going to wonder if you're good enough, strong enough, brave enough." She paused, touching the Navy cross that still hung in her office, too precious to wear daily but never forgotten. "But I'm going to tell you this. When a Marine calls for a corpsman, when a life hangs in the balance, you are enough. Your training is enough. Your courage is enough. Because in that moment, you're not just a medic, you're hope, you're salvation. You're the angel standing between a warrior and death." Sarah's eyes found several faces in the crowd, young corpsmen with determination burning in their eyes, ready to write their own stories of courage. "I made 23 shots that shouldn't have been possible," she continued. "But they weren't impossible because they were necessary. Because 18 Marines needed one more minute to reach safety. Because I refused to accept that good enough was good enough." She stepped forward, her rebuilt legs supporting her weight without complaint. So when you're out there, when everything seems impossible, when you're hurt and scared and wondering if you can take one more step, remember that the impossible is just the difficult that no one has done yet. Remember that you carry the legacy of every corpsman who held the line before you. Remember that somewhere, a Marine is counting on you to be their angel. The graduating class stood as one, saluting the woman who had redefined what was possible for Navy corpsmen. Sarah returned the salute, then smiled. "Now get out there and save some lives. That's an order." 20 years after that night in the Hindu Kush, Sarah Chen, now Commander Chen, retired from the Navy with a career that had touched hundreds of lives. She'd received countless awards, trained generations of corpsmen, revolutionized combat medicine protocols. But in her office, surrounded by commendations and photographs, the items she treasured most were simple: 18 letters from the Marines she'd saved that first night, each one writing to thank her on the anniversary of the battle. A worn M4 rifle, now mounted on her wall with a plaque reading "The Impossible Weapon." And a collection of photos showing weddings, children, graduations, lives lived because one woman refused to hide when ordered. Martinez had 4 kids now. Williams had retired and become a teacher. Rodriguez ran a construction company in Texas. Thompson's son, the baby in the onesie, had just enlisted as a Marine, following in his father's footsteps. All of them alive, all of them building legacies of their own. On quiet nights, Sarah would stand before that rifle and remember the valley, the pain, the fear, the absolute certainty that she was going to die, and the equally absolute certainty that dying didn't matter if she could buy her Marines one more minute. Her father, now in his 80s, would visit and find her there sometimes. "Still thinking about that night?" he'd ask. "Always," Sarah would reply. "Those 5 minutes defined everything that came after." "No," her father would correct gently. "Those 5 minutes revealed what was always there, a warrior's heart and an angel's purpose." Sarah Chen smiled, touched the Navy cross hanging beside the rifle, and knew he was right. She'd held the line when it mattered most. And 18 Marines had gone home because of it. In the end, that was the only legacy that mattered. The end.